And this is what Americans don't understand about public healthcare. A topic that I can talk about this for a long time, so I have to be careful. The video is just 10 minutes long, and sometimes I can rant for long times, so I have to be careful with how much I talk. But yeah, this was the channel Kraut. I like Kraut. All the topics are great. Obviously, sometimes people in the comments pointed out that some points are inaccurate, but then again, nowadays especially, people have tendency to say just point blank something is inaccurate if it doesn't align with their view without actually giving any evidence, right? I mean, you will always have some anti-guy commenting like, this is just inaccurate, this is just biased, this and that. People need to understand when somebody, some evidence is there, and some channel like Kraut, right? Some Epic History TV, some history channel like that covers something. They usually check all the evidence there is and check if something something is 80% or more. Like 5 out of 4 people says that this happened, that's what they're gonna take it, right? It's not just just point blank, just take anything that they see. So yeah, first of all, Americans don't understand public healthcare. Yeah, to me, again, this is my view, right? But to me, if a country is rich as United States and they don't have a public healthcare system, that is just absurd. That is just ridiculous. Anytime somebody brings up healthcare, people just scream socialism, think of Hitler and Nazi, and just runs away. Conservatives especially. And it's pretty weird that all these conservative, most of them are kind of from the, poor areas and poor states, right? What are they called? Red states or whatever. So if anything, they would be the one that gets more benefits from healthcare than anything else. Yet they are the one that screams, we don't want this. Look, here's this thing, right? Regardless of if you are conservative, liberal, whatever, left, right, center, whatever, one thing should be basis of about any political thing, that we are human. If we are gonna say that we are above animals, right? We live in a society. We are a civilized people. And if you're rich enough and you don't ensure that at least people living in your bordered society, that is United States of America, at least I can ensure that people don't die because they didn't have a few quids in their pocket, right? I've heard of stories that people don't even call 911 because they know that will cost them like few $1,000s. Few $1,000 just calling 911. What the fuck, right? I mean, US has way too much money. People don't understand. Whenever I say that, like, oh yeah, US has way, yeah, they do. You really can't process, right, compared to the other countries. The level of money they spent in military generals themselves, they say that we don't need this equipment. Why are you giving this to us? But because US is somewhat, I guess, making war equipments type of country, that is one of their biggest thing. Just to drive the economy and create jobs, they make unnecessary military equipment. That's how much money they have, right? So they can easily cover healthcare, right? Or healthcare enough. If countries like Scandinavian countries can do it, United States can definitely do it, right? So to me, it's pretty fucked up that United States don't do it, and every time somebody brings it up, everybody just put their hands in the air and just say, "Oh, socialism." Man, come on. This should be bipartisan, right? Like, at least I can ensure that everybody that is United States citizen gets ensured that they are going to have health at least covered. Like, nobody's just going to die. Besides that, if they're poor, they don't do anything, they don't have anything else going on, or they don't have job, works. Okay, that's all comes aside. But at least I can ensure that they have their health. To me, it's absurd that some country is that rich and they don't have a health system. Like, it's like a country without the net, right? You can get the richest of them all. If not, you can die because you didn't have some few quid in your pocket. That's just, to me, somewhat like Wild West type of thing. I know that's exaggerated, but still. All right? Again, I ranted for 4.5 minutes. I knew that. All right, let's watch this one.
Public healthcare has been a constant re-emerging topic of contention within United States politics.
And FYI, by the way, I know that in United States, overall people spend more on healthcare than the other countries who has healthcare system, free healthcare system do, right? So United States is already paying way much than anybody else would. It's already costing them more than a healthcare would, right? because of capitalism. Medical pharma companies are asking for way too much money for some simple pills and simple medicine. That wouldn't have happened under healthcare if government was paying for it, because government isn't going to say like, I'm going to give you this much money to whatever company that is. They would negotiate like, fuck you, I'm not giving you this money, just bring your money down, or I'll basically pass some bill that does.
As far back as I can remember. It is a topic of contention in the current election cycle and will in all likelihood be in future elections again.
Oh, it's 2019
Watching this
video.
American debate as a European living with such a healthcare system, there is however something that has always been strange to me, which is that not one proponent of such seems to have an idea of what it is, how it would work, how such a system would be built, and what it would require from everyday citizens as well as society at large. Most American proponents of public healthcare seem to get their idea of what it is and how it works from a Michael Moore movie, a movie that does an absolutely awful job at presenting the systems we have in European countries. All it really does is show us English and French doctors and nurses proclaim how superior these countries' healthcare systems are, and that's pretty much it. But there's far more to it.
NHS is not perfect, right? Way too many stories will tell you the NHS is not perfect, but then again, there will be way too many people who will say that I'm so glad NHS exists and it saved my life. It saved, it helped so many people that they actually put a whole NHS theme in their Olympics, right? Olympic celebrations.
Than that, those two countries have vastly different systems and are more on the extreme ends of what public healthcare is. Especially giving England as an example of a great public healthcare system is somewhat ridiculous, because the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, is one of the worst healthcare services in Europe. Created during the 1950s in the post-war consensus, an age of massive centralized government organizations and public spending, the NHS was plagued from the beginning with a massive entangled bureaucracy. Detangling and reorganizing the system during the 1970s barely fixed the problems. Things were made worse under the Thatcher administration through the introduction of a management system intent on cutting back costs and increasing efficiency, and substantial damage was done to the NHS by the government of Tony Blair. He believed that the public service could be run like a private company despite having no market competition. His government introduced a system of quotas and standards meant to artificially replicate market pressures. This was meant to make the overall service more efficient, but in the end accelerated its declining quality. Subsequent British governments have done little to resolve these issues. Not all is bad on the British Isles, though. In 1999, Scotland retained control over healthcare legislation from Westminster for the NHS Scotland. They avoided the Frankenstein reforms Tony Blair forced on England, created their own institutions, smaller bureaucracy, centred around 14 local health boards run by officials specific to manage these regional healthcare needs. Overall, Scotland's public healthcare performs better, and giving England as an example to Americans of how a public healthcare system is supposed to operate and work is just a giant misconception and misleading. England is an extreme example, and it is more of an example of how not to do it. France is on the opposite extreme. The services look amazing to foreigners, like the fact that every mother gets a nurse assigned to her by the government to help her out through the first 2 to 4 years of motherhood, until her kids are old enough to go to kindergarten, which in France is also government funded. But what Michael Moore and others who praise the French system don't show you is the enormity of costs and the size of the apparatus behind this system. France on average spends between 12 to 15% of its
one theme is about France is always there, that sometimes they spend things and just, they want certain luxuries that is not necessarily needed there, but they're like, oh, this must be there, otherwise what's the point of living? So kind of understandable, but yeah.
National budget on its healthcare system. Every French citizen is required by law to pay into a national health insurance fund, the amount of the fee being determined by the individual citizen's income. France also has taxes, for example on gambling and casinos, the revenue of which specifically goes straight into the national health insurance fund. The system, which is centralized and run by the Ministry of Social Affairs, Health and Women's Rights, only works due to the massive amount of funds and resources allocated by the French state to ensure its viability. It works because the French are willing to pay the taxes and fees required to make it work. And this is where we go from Americans having wrong impressions about public healthcare to their understanding of it being also somewhat flawed. Because the debate about a public healthcare system is about far more than silly pedantic meandering over whether or not it's communism. It's a debate over structure, taxes and social sacrifices made, as well as burdens upon the individual or society at large. Whenever I saw a Bernie Sanders or other US politician continuously talk about how much they want a public healthcare system, the only thing they ever talk about is how much they want it, how great it would be for everyone, but never about what it means for the country and how it would be structured, built or implemented. There are simply questions, however, that must...
Alright, Obama came across this issue and he realized that we cannot just restructure an entire healthcare system because people already have their insurances, the system is already kind of in place, and if you want to restructure everything, that's going to be a big ass blow. That's why he came up with the health Obamacare or whatever that's called, American healthcare system, whatever that was called, right? That was kind of like a stapling together with what you already have and what government can do, right? It kind of worked, right? It was kind of good. It was good enough that Republicans tried to repeal it but couldn't multiple times for years because they couldn't come up with something good until Trump said fuck it and just repealed it without giving a good alternative. And there you go.
Be asked, like, is the US government even willing to allocate 12% to 15% of its annual budget into such a system? How well would it bode with ordinary US citizens to levy additional taxes from them for such a system? Because the bottom line remains that taxes paid to ensure the functioning of such systems in European countries are not just levied from super rich, no, they are paid by everyone. So in the end, this is a tax burden.
Hold up there. I mean, look, sure it's 12-15%, but all the, all the medical companies, right, that, gets money from public, right, and certain exemptions here and there, if you combine all of that, would it be 12-15% though? Would an average person lose that much money from their pocket? Because like I said, average US citizen already spends way too much on a healthcare than they would have if there was an actual healthcare there, right? They already spend with the insurances, whatever pay they pay for their normal checkup. Overall, they're paying way too much.
It will come down on ordinary working people just as well. And if you do not have this conversation as you campaign for public healthcare, you will eventually be forced to having this conversation when you try to implement it through the legislature. Beside the financing and taxation aspect of public healthcare, there's an additional aspect never talked about in the US political debate. If you are an American and you have ever been to Europe, you may have noticed that Coke tastes different here. It's less sweet. The reason is that our governments regulate the contents of sugar and take an interest in how healthy or unhealthy the produce we consume is. Some countries, such as the UK, even have a sugar tax. Denmark.
Yeah, so EU basically does things like that, and people can hate on EU as much as they want, and sometimes it might even look like, they're restricting certain people's freedom. But one thing's for damn sure, compared to the, especially like United States Congress and other countries' Congresses basically, right, EU actually does something, right? Recently they implemented that every phone must have USB-C socket. So, across the board, there is not much wastage there because everybody has the USB-C wire for, whatever application they have. So they don't have to have multiple wires. Apple had problem with it because they have that, what are they called, power or whatever, their own socket, right? But you said, fuck it, fuck Apple. I'm just going to put, if everything is using USB-C, even the Apple laptops and things are using USB-C, then every phone must use USB-C too, USB-C basically. So they actually do something. They actually implement something like that, like put less sugar in things like this. They actually fucking regulate.
Has a tax on fat. Most European countries have high tobacco tax. Sweden has a very high alcohol tax. European countries have the strictest regulations on food quality in the world. Even beyond just a simple what we eat and drink, it is also how we buy that is regulated. The UK, for example, banned the advertising of candy and sweets using cartoon characters or any other advertising method that specifically targets children. Outside of food, there are government incentives and initiatives to keep citizens healthy, from subsidized fitness and sport initiatives down to extensive fitness programs for school kids. Why? Let's leave Europe for a great example for why. Japan has a public healthcare system. It is one of the best healthcare systems in the world in terms of quality and efficiency. Japan is also the country with one of the world's best healthcare systems that spends the least money on it. because Japan also has the healthiest population in the world. Once you have a healthcare system that is financed by
Japan's alternate name could be efficient. Holy shit, that train gets few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes late and they give you free ticket. Are you kidding me? I mean, as an Indian, that's just ridiculous. In here, 20-minute late is just like, yeah, that's just a standard.
taxpayers. The taxpayers, and by that extent the government, have a vested interest in the health and well-being of the taxpayers. Or rephrased, if you are morbidly obese in the United States, it is your responsibility, or should I rather say, your lack of responsibility. It will reflect itself within the costs you pay to whatever insurance company you sign up with.
Yeah, don't want to pause too much, but yeah, Bill Burr said this too. Like, if you go to McDonald's and ask for 50 burgers, they're gonna give you 50 burgers. That's a fucking business. It's not their responsibility to give you salad, which they kind of started doing. Like, okay, McDonald's salad. Why would you eat a McDonald's salad? You want salad? There are other places.
You pay the consequences, not just in diabetes and cardiac arrests, but financially. In a country with a public healthcare system, if you are morbidly obese, costs for your resulting treatments are paid by other people's taxes. It is consequently no longer just your responsibility. If you are fat in a country with a public healthcare system, you are a burden on society. And there's a question to be asked and answered of whether the people of the United States can even put up with such a standard. Personal responsibility and independence is at the core of the country's identity. Seeing your actions and your life within the wider framework of how they impact society at large is not necessarily something attractive to many Americans. Additional taxation on unhealthy produce, as well as a government-sponsored and encouraged incentive to live healthy lives, is also something that most Americans would probably not even accept. A few years ago, the former mayor...
That's the problem the world faces, especially in the United States. People say this violates my freedom. You need to understand, whenever we talk about something, it's not either this or that. It's a spectrum. There always has to be a sweet spot. You cannot just say like, don't infringe on my freedom at all. Then you end up with a Wild West type of system, right? Then you cannot be surprised like why things are not working. There will always be something that will feel like it's infringing on your right, right? It's the Congress's job, right, to see like how much it is infringing and it is a real issue or not, right? Like if you create a healthcare system, right, and if that system tells you like if you're not eating healthy, right, you'll be taxed more because you're being a burden on system. Yeah, that has to be there, right? And basically, if everybody tells you to be healthy, I know that's a big thing. Like eat more. That has become a thing nowadays, right? Like if you see somebody lean and fit, it's like you're body shaming the people who are not. I mean. First of all, if it's about social element, I understand. But if it's just point blank science, like being obese is science that it's bad for your health. That's fucking science. That's not disputable, right? You can dispute social element all you want, but when it comes to science, that's not disputable. If you're obese, that's not good for your health. So government can tell you, like, if this is a science, established science by a PhD holder scientist that tells you that being obese is not good for your health, then be healthy. Government can tell you, should have balls to tell you that if it's science.
Of New York, Bloomberg, attempted to ban the biggest sized soda bottles in measures intended to incentivize healthy living for New Yorkers. New York, being a place that would probably be pro-public healthcare, protested that measures substantially to the point that it was rejected. However, in a conversation over whether or not to have a public healthcare system, such measures are part of the conversation that are simply unavoidable. Yet the proponents of public healthcare in the United States
how big is this
don't
bottle,
ever
man?
discuss this.
Is that a gallon or something?
American politicians who argue for public healthcare only ever say that they advocate for it, but never actually lay out any policy plan for how they would finance such a system or even what such a system would look like.
Good point.
But also more crucially, how they would incentivize Americans into being healthier. And that is an important conversation that must be had, especially when you keep in mind how unhealthy the average American is. A public healthcare system is not intended to be a daycare for obese people to continuously even out the consequences of their irresponsibility. And if you introduce a public option without incentivizing a healthy public, that is exactly what your healthcare system will turn into. I personally don't believe a federal centralized public healthcare system like in France would work in the United States. The country is too big, the bureaucracy would be too large, the taxpayers unwilling to pay, and the political landscape unwilling to put up with such. In France, there's a consensus amongst both sides of the political aisle to ensure the healthy state of their healthcare system. That bipartisan consensus does not exist in the United States. If a Democratic president were to introduce it, it would only exist until the next Republican president comes into office. Additionally, I don't believe a centralized federal healthcare system is even desirable. The system I prefer the most is one you got a taste of in the beginning of this video. Countries such as Germany and Austria employ a system in which healthcare is federally mandated and even subsidized, but implementation of the system is largely handed over to the individual states. I don't believe that a top-to-bottom federal healthcare mandate would work in the United States, and what I would propose to Americans who wish to have such a system is to abandon the idea of a federal public healthcare program. The legalization of cannabis shows how reforms are best implemented within the United States, namely through legislation in the individual states to then convince those in other states of the viability of the reforms. I believe it would be better for the American advocates of public healthcare to campaign for public healthcare in their home states through state legislature and the governor's office. Not only are such efforts more likely to bring...
Let's be honest, in United States, states are first before federal level, right? I mean, that's how the entire United States were formed in the first place, right? States have their own laws, states can do certain things their own way. So, yes, states have to put their feet front, right? Until certain states do, others will see and move forward as well. Like how it happened with cannabis, like he's saying.
Results, but would also achieve a public healthcare system without the consequent possibility of having the federal government step in and dismantle it if those in power of it oppose it, as the centralized British government would have done to Scotland if they hadn't retained control of their healthcare service in 1999. Such a regional system is also
Scotland
more efficient
and England,
and more in
always
touch
friends.
with the people within the comparably smaller state it has to serve, and the advocates of a public healthcare system would also be more in touch with their own communities, and therefore it would be easier to debate and implement subsequent other measures incentivizing healthier living and finding the revenue source for the system.
Yep, there we go. All right. Like I said, look, in USA, like he said, it's pretty hard to see how a system would pass at all, because anytime something that infringes anybody's right even slightly, or if it even doesn't, right, there is no absolute in life, right? There is always, like I said, a spectrum. It's not either this or that, right? So, saying you can't have complete freedom, otherwise governments wouldn't exist, right? There would always be compromises everywhere, right? Even the science tells us there is no absolute anywhere. Even you can't measure something accurately. So the point is, there is always, you come to a point, you agree like this is fine and move on. If you can't do that, your government will not work, right? So you have to agree on like what is more important, right? If government basically does this, it feels like it's infringing on your right, sure, but is it in an overall run, is it helping your society, right? Is it trying to keep you more healthy? Is it a healthcare system? You have to understand, like, there are way too many obese people. Would other people pay for their health? If not, should we put some kind of an extra tax if somebody is obese? If pointing that out would become a social issue, right? Like body shaming or something, or is that just science? You have to, agree on things like that. But 10 years ago, no, wait a minute, not 10, 13 or 14 years ago, 2007 or 8, I used to drink Mountain Dew. Oh my God. I had a fucking drawer full of bottles. Right now I'm thinking, it's, giving me goosebumps just thinking about, like, holy shit, how fucked up I was. I had a drawer full of empty Dew bottles because I didn't know where to throw them. Throughout the day, I at least drink like 1.5 to 2 liters of Dew every day for a year or two. I had 500 or 600 bottles stored somewhere, right? That's how much I was drinking it. I was fat, really fat. I was like 80 kilos without any muscle. Before I looked myself in the mirror like, what the fuck? And then I bought my first dumbbell, and then I started to work out. So now I'm here, right? So basically, there is a responsibility. Like, a person is somewhat obese, need to realize that this is not healthy. If the person wants to be healthy or not, right, it's their choice. The system, how it's going to work, somebody needs to figure it out, like how my society basically sees things and how am I going to implement this. It's really hard. But yeah, that is something. Right, well, that was what Americans understand about public healthcare by the channel Kraut. If you like Americans, don't forget to subscribe. Holy shit, it's like 25-minute video. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.